Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. In this bonus season, we've been reading perspectives from some of Matt Cawthon's friends. Welcome to what we've been calling Season 2.5, Episode 10, where we're finishing up Fortuona's point of view. I'm your co host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimarus, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in depth character reread podcast, and we may drop spoilers at random times, so this is your only spoiler warning. Today, we are examining Towers of Midnight, Chapter 47, and A Memory of Light, Chapters 24 and 37. I'll get us started with Towers of Midnight, Chapter 47, entitled A Teaching Chamber. Fortuona Atheum Devi Pendrag, ruler of the glorious Xianshan Empire, marched into her teaching chamber. That's a direct quote from how this chapter starts. Tuon's gown was so long and full that it took 5 dacovel to carry the train, and it was embroidered with phrases of empirical doctrination. The dacovel positioned her on the throne that was set up in the room and then arranged her skirts, which was the sign that everyone else could rise from the floor. Fortuona enjoyed coming here and watching the damane being trained. Then King Beslan entered, as well as General Galgon and a few more of the low blood. Galgon had been busy executing assassins in the city, but only after talking to them about assassinating the Empress. It was a move calculated to keep her wary and yet to show his loyalty at the same time. King Beslan was steadfastly loyal, and it unnerved Empress Fortuona a bit. She was not sure how to react to such undying and unwavering loyalty from one of the blood, but from what she had learned from Matrim, this was normal on this side of the ocean. Such a strange people. Anyway, today's meeting inside the teaching chamber was not coincidental. She had Seleucia call forth the Dersuldam, who brought a red-eyed damane on a leash. Show us what this woman can do. The damane Sufa was poorly broken as of yet, and she began crying and begging to be released. Please listen to me. I am the Amerlin seat. End quote. She begged through the pain that was forced on her through the Adam, trying to buy her freedom somehow. Finally, she collapsed from the torture. Fortuona chose not to be displeased with the damane, nor with the Dersuldam. She knew that the damane who were formerly Aes Sedai were difficult. Once the damane had recovered, she obediently showed the Empress a weave that she had been commanded to make. A gateway. The thing was real, not just some wild rumor on this side of the ocean. Fortuona, General Galgan, and King Beslan studied the gateway, all with surprise, fear, and interest. They knew that this changed everything about the war. Galgon wanted details before he even thought about using it in battle. He needed to know the range, the size, all of the limitations. It was Beslan who first pointed out that the enemy could open one of these behind their lines, or even in the Empress's bedchamber itself, which the Death Watch guard did not like at all. Fortuona stood and declared that they would use this in another raid against the White Tower. Quote, before we struck them with a pinprick, now we will let them know the full weight of our sword. The White Tower was doomed. End quote.
This chapter has a lot of very plot relevant information, and it's one I didn't remember very well because I'm just not as familiar with these last three books. I am still in Towers of Midnight on my reread, but the previous ones I know well because of following a lot of podcasts and just having a lot of discussions with people on Twitter time and things like that. So there's a lot to be gleaned from these Sanderson books that I just don't remember very well. So this chapter is definitely one of them. I forgot just how the antagonism with the Shan ramped up so much. That's what I got like plot wise out of this chapter, that it seemed like we could have been optimistic about where the Shan part of the story was going because of Matt's new attachment to the Empire. I mean, they just completed their marriage ceremony at the end of Knife of Dreams, and this is a couple of books later. But here she pushes back mostly because of that meeting with Rand that was so dark and so difficult, and also because of the influence of Lieutenant General Yulan, and we're going to talk a little more about him in an upcoming chapter. His influence was also shadowed, I guess you could say. He was compelled by one of the Forsaken, and so he's the one who proposed that assault on the tower the first time. Now Tuon is upset enough from her meeting with Rand to double down on that. So I forgot just how threatening they got even this late in the game, even though they've been in the story since book 2. That's what I got out of it plot wise, but Tuon wise, as far as her character, there wasn't a lot of new information to get here for me. I just forgot like just how dark she went. Like you said last episode, I think you said Rand was at his Darth Randist, and she kind of
Yes.
was at her peak darkness as well. But here she's still at that peak. She has yet to fall from those heights. Something about her and her history and personality from this chapter is that she enjoys coming to this room to supervise the Sul'dam breaking the Damane. Not only the training, but she enjoys the breaking part and finds it soothing. The choice of the word soothing there was especially chilling, I think. And it just makes me wonder, we talked so much about how we hope that Tuon reforms and we hope that the Empire reforms when it comes to their systems of slavery. And we hope that they, abolish these practices. And in this chapter, I don't see any seeds that that's ever going to happen. Now, obviously, there's a little more resolution to her being so opposed to our main characters later on, but right now, it looks like there's no way forward. And even sifting through what we know from her of the future, it's like I still wonder how you reform somebody who takes such enjoyment out of this. Like, I understand that she doesn't believe Damane are people, but even if you believe they are animals, even treating animals like this and taking enjoyment out of them suffering like that and needing to be trained harshly is, to me, not a redeeming quality in a person or a good sign that they could have the compassion for human suffering also, even if they start to regard these others as human. So just wonder, how do you make inroads with somebody like that to start changing their heart? How could you do that? And I think something I see in public discourse around politics a lot is appealing to strategic and economic goals. Because maybe you might think, okay, maybe we could give this person a self-interested reason why they should care about this goal, even if we are not on the same page about where our hearts are at. And so I wonder if that is where Matt could start with her, and then she softens up some more, maybe before she acknowledges that that's what's happening, because we know she's great at denial. I wonder if spinning freeing Damane as some way to improve the Empire could be helpful. Like, it's a way to gain more allies from the mainland to come help you clean up Shanchan after you've helped them out in the last battle. Like, I don't really know, but there's a
Right.
reaction meme I see a lot going around that says stuff like, I don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people. When you get into some
Right.
kind of ethical
Right.
argument, it's like there are some issues where no amount of economic or strategic arguing is going to get anywhere if you and I don't agree on some basic values of who we
Right.
care about. And I don't know, I can't impart that to you. There's no piece of
Right.
information I could give you that might make you care if you don't care. So
Right.
yeah, it's just
Mm.
interesting to me, like, how does she soften up? Because I actually don't psychologically like know the answer to that question. I have some ideas that have their own problems, but I just wondered your thoughts on just how dark she is in this chapter and
Yeah.
how you could go about getting through to somebody like this.
Yeah. Well, to me, as far as how dark she is in this chapter, I think a lot of it, as you said, is reaction to Rand, the meeting with him, her decision that if they're going to move forward and win the last battle, they have to unite this land. So, she's coming in really hot and fast. They've had the success of the raid against the White Tower. So, that she's just going to move forward with her plans because right now there is no plan B. This is all they
Mm,
have. This is the
yeah.
only thing until Rand comes to her for the second meeting. There are no other options, I should say. As far as the societal changes, I believe that for any societal change this big, it takes a generation.
Mm,
People who have been raised and inculcated in a society that does not value human life, and we can see this in any society throughout history, when a civilization has gotten to the point that human life is not valued to them or not valuable to them, then whenever something happens to change that, people who've grown up in that, they don't really change for the most part. Now,
mm,
you have a few that do, but as far as society as a whole, you basically you have to force some changes, and then people's minds get changed once the new generation grows up and sees the humanity of the people that they once dehumanized.
mm,
Until the older generation dies off and the newer one comes in with new values, it's not going to change. Again, until a change is forced upon someone. If she finds this soothing, this is already such a part of her culture, she's not going to suddenly start caring about people as individuals.
yeah.
And as empress, she really can't. She cannot think of people that way. It's, the good of the empire has got to be above all the rest. So in my mind, I can see her changing or changing the laws concerning Damane possibly in the future,
Mhm,
because we've come to realize that some women can learn to channel, and all of these Suldam are potential damane. So we
mhm,
can no longer say they're not human, they're out of control, they must be collared and be controlled. There's got to be another way of dealing with this issue. And she knows that can tear apart Seanchan culture and society. So the best thing to do is, once we're through with this last battle business and move forward and start rebuilding society here, preparing possibly to go back over the Arath Ocean and reclaim the Seanchan society, she might have to make those changes just to save her nation, to
yeah.
save the empire itself, to save her rule.
Might need to get ahead of that,
Right.
critical
Right.
mass of the people building up to the point that they might rebel about it if they know this,
Yes.
because, there's families everywhere whose children have been stricken from their family trees and everything else, who have been affected by the enslavement of channelers, and I'm sure to some degree they were able to distance themselves from those facts and dehumanize their own family members, but I don't think it's something that they fully move past. I think it's something they would just have to shove down, right? And this would
Right.
happen across all ranks of society, because
Right.
channeling doesn't seem to show up in different social classes or whatever. So it seems like if she didn't address it, that it would become a huge problem for her politically. So yeah, I think like you said, she needs to do it probably just for like political and strategic reasons. Needs to do something about it legally, but still may not have like heart and mind changed about it. And I think you're probably right about another generation. And you noted just how she was raised with such isolation, and maybe that contributes so much to the way she dehumanizes others and even herself by subsuming all of her own desires within a role and a symbol instead of getting to really be an individual. Matt really needs to help her break the cycle with their child. And you have noted this
Right.
before, that you have the hope that they have the ability to do that. And I think just from knowing Matt, even though he would complain probably about some parenting responsibilities, I think he would not allow servants to just totally take that over. I think he would probably be like, "No, I'm signing up to be number one bodyguard for my kid," or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just think he would continue to flout customs and change a lot of how their kid was raised, and that may soften up Tuon a little bit too. But in the way that some children can kind of eventually pull their parents along with a kind of a rising tide of justice, I suppose, changing the way things are done in a society. But I think you've got a good. I was trying to figure out how would you rescue her, but I guess we don't need to focus on that. I think it would be more like, how would a society need to move on, instead of just
Right.
trying to
Right.
redeem every individual who had been a part of this oppression.
Right. I could almost see at some point in time somebody who's from this side of the ocean who's been raised to the blood, like Beslin has,
Mhm.
stand up and be their William Wilberforce or John Newton, men who stood up to fight against slavery, even though in Newton's case he used to work on the slave ships.
Mm.
when we look at that history. Of course, then he went on to write Amazing Grace because there were some changes in his life, some things that made him a firm abolitionist. So, maybe someone like that would come along and help influence her to say, okay, there's a better way of doing this. And with the knowledge she has, those societal changes can take place. I don't see that change coming from Tuon.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
could see Matt influencing her that way, but Matt would do it, but he's gonna complain about it so much and claim he's not an agent of change and he's
Mm.
not a
Yeah.
bloody lord until I don't know how effective he could be by himself, but I could see at some point in time other people coming forward. Hey, we need to do this, and here's why. And coupled with what she knows and seeing a growing societal change within the people themselves, I could see something like that happening, but it would take an entire change of scenery. I mean,
Mm.
you gotta have new people, you gotta have new stresses on the society and on the population itself. Right now,
Right.
people are worried because they're running out of food, they're running out of goodness and light in the world, and they have to be focused on defeating the darkness. And after that, and after the new normal sets in, then I could see other changes coming about. Like I said,
Mm.
just because of the new stresses and changes on society anyway, yeah, gosh, you've got whole countries that have pretty much been depopulated,
Mm. Yeah.
millions of people displaced, and some of those, coming in, interacting with the Xianqian, you could just see things would start changing and evolving, and hopefully that would be a positive change.
I just thought of a great analog to this, and I will tag it for spoilers for people who have not read The Realm of the Elderlings. And I believe you haven't read at least the final book, but probably enough of the same books that you'd be caught up on the points I'm trying to make here. The wit, the ability to communicate with animals is treated very terribly, and people are lynched and everything for it. It's something that people are very dehumanized for in that world in the Six Duchies. You get to see over the progression of the series. I mean, you follow Fitz for, over 50 years. So you do get to see a generation's worth of change in the way that the wit is handled. I mean, it's something not even spoken about when the series starts. And then in some of the middle books, like the Tawny Man trilogy, there are some rebellions about it. There's multiple factions of witted people who are causing a lot of political problems, and they have various different ways of trying to fight back against their oppression, some of them being more violent than others. And then by the end of the series, you see it something being talked about openly enough that people in very public facing positions can feel safe talking about even having this ability, the wit.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I did not even think of that, never paralleled those in my mind, but yeah, I could definitely see that. And it does kind of bear out the fact that it takes time to change
Hmm.
people's points of view. It really does. I wish more changes, more positive changes could come about faster. One thing you had mentioned how this scene is not one that had stuck in your mind from your first read through, and the same thing with me. I had completely forgotten about this scene from my first read through of the series, and on the second read through, it really stood out to me because in my mind, after reading the series the first time, the only or the last image I had of Elida was her being carried away on a Torokan,
Yep, same.
that was horrifying to me, and I don't know why, because so many
Mm.
women had been taken and collared, but that was as much as I hated Elida, that was not the ending I wanted for her. I would much
Hmm.
rather found some kind of redemption. And and then when we get to this scene and, it's sort of somewhat fresh to me from just a few months ago when I hit this book in my reread, I was delighted to see her again, but still saddened by the state in which we find Elida because she is so damaged, yet she's not really broken. By saying that they haven't broken her to the point that she's an obedient Damane, but she's a broken
Right.
human being. She's just so messed up and in so much pain and so terrible. And yeah, I kind of thought of a parallel here that she has worn the collar at this point in time in the story about the same length of time that Egwene had worn it earlier on in the series.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
the thing that made or one of the things that made Egwene stronger was having worn that collar, and it's the very thing that makes Elida weaker. You see her trying to
Mm,
make a bargain. I'll send 10 women, 20 women in my place if you'll let me go. And she would have done it. She cares
yeah.
so little about other people. It's like she never cared about anybody else's inconveniences or pain or point of view or anything, only her own. And in a way, Elida was more of a, I don't know if I should say sociopath in that way, and I probably have the wrong term here, but she is just so.
At least a narcissist.
Yes, yes.
At least, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. So she's such a narcissist that she is worse in a way than Tuon is, because Tuon is willing
Mm,
to collar women and keep them that way because that's normal for her society. Elida is willing to do it, knowing how horrible it is, how horrific it
mm,
is, and yet is willing to collar other women as long as she can be free. She's so, I don't know, cold, has no empathy, no understanding of other people. And that was one of the things that made her such a bad leader in the White Tower. Is she wouldn't even listen to other people's advice or the scouting reports that would come in saying, "Oh, the Black Tower has 300 men." She's like, it's 20 at most, or whatever.
mhm.
That's not a direct quote, but just,
Right.
whatever she thought in her head, that was the truth to Elida. And you couldn't change her mind because it's only what she thought that mattered and only what she feels that matters. I guess, again, I wanted to find some redeeming quality in her. I wanted at some
Mm.
point for her to say, I was wrong and you're right, and see her grow as a character. But we never see
Oh,
that with
yeah.
her. We always see it as degenerate.
It makes sense to me to feel dissatisfied with this storyline because it feels like maybe there's some lack of resolution there, but also maybe we're meant to be uncomfortable with somebody being taken demane as punishment, but it seems like a sense of justice that is advocated by the narrative when we look very early on and see that Nynaeve doesn't let Egwene and Elaine kill the Sul'dan that they captured, for example. I think that, and they didn't just like execute Mo Gideon right away and stuff like that. And they didn't use and just like torture her with the ADOM all the time, even when they had her as a captive. I'm not saying that them having her as a captive was right either. I think that's a little, I'm a little squicked out by that also, but they did not try to break her.
Right,
Um,
right,
they were really just trying to keep her contained for their safety, but also get some information from her. So it was a little complicated, but I think we see many of our heroes when they're in good parts of their arcs and it's clear that they're kind of on a better path, they are not meeting justice out in that vengeful kind of way. And so I think it only makes sense for us to say, oh, I wanted Elida to get punished, but not like this. This is too much.
right, right. Oh, that's the way I have felt. This is the first time I read this series. I'm like, no, kill her, but don't do that to her. Um,
Yeah.
and again, we've seen several of the Aes Sedai who have been taken. Many were taken in this raid. Many were taken before. I mean, ever since the early days at Falma, there have been some of the Aes Sedai who were collared and never released, to our knowledge. And it hurts you, but this is someone we knew. This is someone we got to
Yeah.
see and understand, even though we didn't like. Elida is someone we all love to hate. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't wish terrible things even on people I really don't like, even on people I hate. I don't wish terrible
Yeah.
things upon us, things like this, never.
When something like this happens to any other character, even if you already know them, it could feel like misfortune.
Right, right,
In this case, it feels like it is a punishment almost by the universe, and I think that's part of what makes me so uncomfortable with it, is if somebody is just a victim of a calamity, I can feel sympathy for them as a victim. Here, it's like it feels almost like, "Oh, okay, the bad guy is getting punished at the end of the story," and it's like, "Oh, I don't want him punished like this."
yeah, steeled, birched, and executed maybe, but not enslaved.
And we talked about how we didn't remember this passage very well, and that our last image of Elida was being carried away. When I read this, I suddenly had a tiny flash to the first time I read it. It's not a memory I could have conjured up. I just recognized, having been through this before when I was reading it. But when she goes, "I'm the Amerlin," I'm like, "Oh, Egwene colored
Oh,
again?" Until she's like, "I'll give you 10 other
yes,
women," and then I know that's not
right,
Egwene, obviously,
yeah.
but and especially jumping in here, not remembering where everybody is when we're reading, out of order and skipping around like this. I knew this time it wasn't Egwene, but I remembered that fear, and I wondered if that's something we were supposed to think for a little bit, and maybe why kind of we forgot why Elida was in this chapter. I don't know. That I wondered if that's why I'd forgotten it. But I know this is totally off the topic of Tuon, but there was just so much to talk about here.
Yes. Yes, there's a lot to unpack in this one. Oh, well, and speaking of Tuon now, just real briefly, one of the things that I don't recall ever seeing anywhere else in the series is she walks in, she has this long train of her robes,
Mhm.
and it's basically embroidered with things like the empress must be obeyed.
Oh
The
yeah.
empire is the empress, or the empress is the empire, something like that. But
Hmm.
all these phrases, these slogans of obedience. I mean, it's very Orwellian,
Mm.
1984
Mhm.
type brainwashing indoctrination.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
not just that they have these slogans, they use these slogans, it's embroidered on her robe. So when everyone raises their eyes,
Mm.
they see, they're reminded of her power and their forced obedience to her.
Oh, that's a great point that that's only about as high as they're probably allowed to
Right,
look,
right.
is her robes. And I barely noticed that, didn't really remark on it, but now that you say it, I'm like, that's so heavy-handed.
Yes,
It goes to show, I think, probably how out of control she feels right now, that she has to employ such explicit symbolism,
right, right.
I mean, it's not exactly even symbolism, but such explicit instructions, reminding everybody that she is basically to be
Yeah,
worshipped and just followed
right.
unquestioningly.
She's not in the
Mm-mm.
playful mood she had been at times with Matrim Cawthon. She's in a dead serious mood. And it's odd that someone who is so, as you said, worshipped, and she is, the empress lives forever, the empire is the empress, all these things, and yet she finds it normal and comfortable that Galgun has been talking to assassins. And at this point, he's been having them
Yeah.
killed after he talks to them, so he's seeking them out. But even she said that's a ploy, basically, or a sign to her that, okay, I'm always going to be looking out for assassins. I'm always keeping that on the back burner, that I may try to have you killed, but I'm loyal to you for right now, as long as you keep doing the right thing. She's
Mm.
comfortable with that.
Right.
That's
It's a
normal for
flex.
the blood.
Yeah.
That's what they do. And
So
she's
messed up.
freaked out by Beslin, who has done nothing like that. His obedience, he is true to his oaths, and it's almost like they expect that kind of obedience and that type of worship from just I don't even know their word for it, but the peons, just the normal people,
Mm.
the common people. But those of the blood, they expect something totally different. They expect the backstabbing and the deception all the time. In fact, they see someone who's trying to have you assassinated as a compliment. They know you're powerful, so they can try to move against you because they're confident you can defeat it. And yeah, you're right. It's so messed up. It's so backward. It's so horrible. But they see this as civilization, as civil society. So there are a
Mm.
lot of
Yeah.
problems with the Xiantian society, not just the slavery issue with the Damane, the Dacovel, the Sojin. There's more there that's really, really out of whack.
It just goes to show how twisted her upbringing was, that she can't trust anybody to really any degree. I mean, it seems implicitly she trusts people like Furi Kareed and Selusha,
Right.
but Galgan even goes as far as sending actual assassins later.
Yes.
That's how Matt finds Selusha with the crossbow. She's like, "Oh, I've already killed one tonight. He's over there."
Yeah.
They're sloppy ones to show for Galgan to show he's not serious.
Right.
It's another flex.
Assassins from this side of the ocean. Yeah, they're not worth anything. Yeah.
Exactly. Not serious at all. She thinks about Matt, how strange it is that he is not a rival to her, and how she might lose her edge without having somebody to compete against in
Mm,
that way all the time. And
right.
it's just sad to me thinking how she could never get close to somebody. I think that maybe she will gain more of a sense of safety with him. We see her breaking down, I think, some walls with him to a degree, or putting some cracks in those by the end of A Memory of Light. Yeah, the idea of trust is just that foreign to her, and the way she was so kind of squicked out by Beslin reminded me of somebody mental health posting on Twitter I saw a couple of years ago, I think, and they said something like, "Are you not a dog person because you can't handle people loving you unconditionally because you don't believe you're worthy of love?" It's like, somebody's freaked out by a creature that loves them. Like, what's wrong with you? Is there some kind of trick to this? Like, why do you like me? And that's why they were more of a cat person, like somebody who's
Right.
going to be hot and cold or still has that ability to rip your throat out,
Right, right.
technically. So I think Tuon is a little more of a cat person, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes, I see it. This would be a clinical psychologist's dream to be able to work with Tuon, have, unfettered access to her mind, because there's a lot of things messed up there.
I think she'd be a challenging client. She'd be like, "What is this superstition?" No, I think she would be so tough to work with.
Alright. Well, that's
um,
all I've got on that one.
Well, in that case, I will go ahead and take us into chapter 24 from A Memory of Light called To Ignore the Omens. Since our last chapter, Fortuna's story has had a few bumps on the road, so I'll go ahead and summarize a few of those before I actually get into the content of the chapter. Matt returned to Ebu Dar. They consummated their marriage. Zinran negotiated peace with her. They agreed that she would still control Terabon and half of Almuth Plain, but was going to stop the conquest for now, at least, and would keep the Demane she had already captured, but wouldn't take any others from lands she didn't control. And if she did, it would be considered an act of war. She left off her plans to assault the White Tower for now, to agree to join the Dragonsworn in the last battle. Matt roughly accepted his position as part of the Shanchan forces and has been properly girded in Shanchan ceremonial warrior's garb, at least temporarily, before he kind of rips it off and puts his old coat back on. So when we jump into chapter 24, we find Fortuona and Matrim they're preparing their forces for war outside of Ebu Dar. And despite Fortuona's agreement on the treaties and terms that Rand had presented her, it still remains to her, in her mind, an open question of whether she's actually going to follow through on her word and follow Matt's strategy recommendations. Beslin had been eager to fight alongside them, but he actually agreed to stay in Ebu Dar and rule his people as the Empress suggested. Fortuona valued his and his people's fighting spirit now that they were properly civilized. Matrim, however, was not yet so tamed, and Seleucia wondered aloud, of course via their sign language, whether they would follow his suggestions as he paced about giving orders to officers. He moved around awkwardly, and he couldn't seem to go a sentence without swearing and insulting people as he went about this process. What in the world had she done by marrying this guy? She followed the omens, that's what, and she would continue to do so despite her representing order and him pure chaos. She answered Seleucia's query evasively. The world is chaos. General Galgan approached to announce his forces were nearly ready to leave, but Matt was very unhappy with the delay. Fortuona reflects on her relationship to both of them and what she'd been taught growing up about power. Galgan was challenging and ambitious, an appropriate rival to keep her sharp, whereas Matrim, she realized, would never be a rival to her. Highly unusual for the position of consort and Prince of the Ravens. She had not yet declared where Matrim fit into the command structure, but he had been testing the unspoken boundaries of his situation all morning, taking Galgan's questions about troop preparations as permission to oversee them himself. Him flexing his authority like that seemed to chafe against the powerful Captain General Galgan, but Matrim appeared unfazed by this tension. It was time to clarify things, as an omen of danger reminded Fortuona. She summoned him and renamed him Notai, bestowing the position of a rod holder below Galgan's command, but high enough that he would be in all strategic planning meetings and his advice would have to be heeded. Galgan was not pleased with Notai's irreverent behavior in response and expressed his displeasure insultingly. Notai's elevation was bold yet risky, cautioned Seleucia. But Fortuona stood firm in her conviction that the omens demanded she take such great risks to reap great rewards. After all, how else would the prophecies be fulfilled and the Empress win the last battle? Another dilemma soon presented itself. Notai and Yulan both reported intelligence suggesting the Marth Damane army was beset by a powerful unknown enemy force. Notai implored her to commit their forces to aid the Aes Sedai, This could be the perfect opportunity to capture more Damane, though, while they were weakened. Notai appealed to her having signed the treaty with Rand, but apparently the Empress is not ruled by a piece of paper. Still, the threat remains, so she decided to gamble once more and abide by her earlier decision. These Marath Damane would be powerful allies in the last battle, so she must aid them now. Galgan would not like this decision, and she was not sure whether Selucia understood it either, but she took the only course the omens left her.
I'm glad to see at this point Matt is still flaunting Seanchan protocol and getting away with it. But of course, I know we're not focused on Matt here, but I love this scene because you see him
Hmm.
in the Seanchan culture, and he's basically trying to make them see sense, trying to get
Yeah.
some sanity into these crazy people and the way they do things. And he wants to run things the way he would with the band, but these guys were trained differently from the band. And so there, there's some clash, and I like the tension that he seems to be totally unaware of, like he has no idea it's going on, and he probably doesn't. That is probably not something on Matt's radar right now because I think he's excited to be in general mode. But to see
Yeah.
Tuon watching him, to see these reactions, and the ways that she defends him, it's like she doesn't defend his actions, but she defends her decisions in choosing him. She defends her right to name him as right holder, to give him the new name, Notai, which I was really surprised he took to that. I can't recall what it
Yeah.
means in the old tongue, but it must have been something that he felt like was a um, a good fit for him. So
I think it's destroyer of our enemies. I
Ah,
was like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, sure,
Okay.
I can
Yeah,
do that.
yeah. I can enjoy that one, yeah. As long as the enemies don't destroy me back, we're good. So, yeah, I love watching her watch him. We're seeing him, and it's so easy to focus on Matt in this chapter, but seeing him through her eyes, that he is so clueless to what's going on around him. And again, she doesn't defend him, and she doesn't really defend his actions. She defends her decisions. But I really see the softening of Tuon again now that she's in Matt's presence.
Mm,
So
mhm.
I think she can become so focused on order and empire that she goes, completely Darth Tuon, very completely dark, totally onto the evil path until she has Mr. Chaos with her. And that's really
Mhm.
what she needs. It's not what she wants. It's not what anyone else understands, anyone else in the Xianqian culture. Well, really, you look at Matt's friends, they don't understand it either. Nobody on either side,
No, nobody gets it.
nobody sees this one. If she had have chosen someone as the Prince of the Ravens who was Xianchan, I think she would have doubled down on everything she wanted to do and interrupted everything
Mhm.
Rand was trying to do. We would have lost the last battle. Had she softened up to the point that she wanted to go with everything the way they did it this side of the ocean, she would have lost Xianqin. No one would have followed her. She would have lost her grip on them. Someone else would have taken her place. Whether or not they could have had
Mm,
her assassinated, I think they would have tried. But even if she had escaped, she would be a refugee basically, and you
mm,
fall back into the same thing. And so what you
mm.
have to have here is fire and ice. And she's ice. She's ice cold, but she needs that chaotic fire around her. She needs that balance.
Mm.
That's what the entire series has been about, isn't it? Things have been out of balance for
Yeah.
3,000 years because men couldn't use the power without going mad. Only women could. Things were out of balance. It had gotten, we'd gotten a very poor prison because only men channelers worked to make it. It was out of balance. Everything we see that's out of balance here is not just about masculinity and femininity, but about everything in people's lives. And here you see,
Mhm.
the cold, the calculating, the unfeeling and uncaring needs the chaotic. And that's what
Mm.
Tuon needs. That's why the omens lead her that way. That's why the pattern has brought the two of them together. Because Matt, he needs a restraining hand on him that is not a leash. He has that in Tuon. And she needs someone who helps her see the world in a different way. And that is Matt. And as these two opposites thankfully have attracted, and both of them are better for it. By the end of the series, both of these are better people. I think Tuon is a better person at the end of the series than she was even in the previous book.
I mean, you pulled out basically the same themes from this chapter that I did, and then you just put it all so much more succinctly than I was about to. So I love all of that. The order and chaos balance in this chapter was really beautiful. I had never really thought of the both of them quite in those terms. And we talked previously about how the Shanshan seemed to be overdoing the order part, and how Tuon, in her very first point of view chapter, mentioned something being out of balance. And I don't know if she fully comprehends yet that Notai is the one bringing her into balance, and that's finally going to be remedied for her or not. And, she talked about how the Prince of the Raven should be a rival and should be a check on the power of the Empress. And she sort of laments that Matt is not ever going to be that for her. And could he actually be a useful consort? But you pointed out that he already is the check on her tendencies towards the worst aspects of Shan culture. So she has the Prince of the Ravens that she needs and that the Empire needs, and she just doesn't understand it yet. But she has so much trust in the omens that she's willing to go with it anyway. She, much in the same way that her people trust her and they trust her explanations for the weird things that she does, pointing to the omens, she fully trusts them, never questions them really for a second, to understand that she made the right choice with him. Even if nothing that he's doing makes sense, she's like, we have to go with it. The omen said this. And she's so much more of a risk taker in that way than I used to think. She's just as much of a gambler as Matt. She just doesn't have a cool catchphrase about it or anything. But I think you could have put something like it's time to toss the dice at the very end of this chapter, and it would have been perfectly in place with what was happening, because she needs to toss the dice and bet on Matt, and she needs to toss the dice and bet on Matt's plan and on actually joining these, uncivilized mainlanders in the fight for the last battle as she sees it. We are finally seeing, by this point in the series, some of that balance being restored.
Well, I am quite the genius.
Exactly. And there's nothing else to say about this chapter. To our combined powers, we did it. We brought balance to this chapter. So
Uh,
on that note, I'll go ahead and summarize Tuon's perspective from the last battle from
okay.
chapter 37, but I'll give you again a brief catch up just so we can all be on the same page about what happened, because we know this is a monster of a chapter and we kind of just get dumped into little people's points of view here all over the place. So what's happened in the meantime is that Min went to run a message from Gareth Bryn to ask for some Shan help, but Matt's Taviran energy pulled her in, made her spit out an omen that she saw above the Empress's head, and that prompted Fortuona to then keep Min as her new truth speaker and doomsayer. We know the great captains had all been targeted by the shadow by dream compulsion, so then Matt had to take over all the armies, being fully in his element finally. He decided not to tell anybody his overarching battle plan so that they couldn't be intercepted or corrupted in the same way that all the other battle plans had up until that point. He acquired a Sharon Damane, kind of against his wishes, but it ended up happening that way. And through that Damane, the Shanchan pretended to have acquired gateways, even though we know they already had that from Elida and they were just sitting on that information. And then they started using them to watch battles from above. So Matt could get this bird's eye view of the battlefields. And using this, Matt would give orders only at the last second, only on a need to know basis for just the people who needed to carry them out. And then he could see those instantly getting carried out on the battlefields from above. But he also saw almost instant responses from the enemy before they should have even known what Matt's forces of the light were going to do. So from that, he deduced that there was a spy in the command tent with him and Fortuona, but he didn't yet know who it was. Ayad, Shar, and Channelers attacked the command tent. Min ended up saving Fortuona, although they both took a few minor burns. Matt fended off some gray men, and that is where we start. In the 30th point of view during the last battle chapter, it's the only Fortuona point of view in that chapter. We find her having refused both a change of clothes, because hers are kind of burned and smoky, and also refusing Damane healing. Although the practice was becoming more accepted, she was unsure whether the Empress should be seen receiving it. Then, to honor the Death Watch guards, including our boy Farid Karid, who had missed assassins for the second time, she ordered them to their deaths. They were to go engage the Marth Damane enemies directly to attempt to kill every last Ayad. For this, she would set herself a penance later. Fortuona then raised Darbinda, previously known as Min, to the blood for her heroic act in saving the Empress. She then staged a fight with Notai about his failure in securing the camp. She announced that she should never have joined him in battle and plans to defend her lands to the southwest. Galgan seemed unhappy with her orders and her criticism of Notai, causing Fortunatus to suspect him of being the spy, or perhaps Notai had just gained his loyalty after all. It was kind of hard to read the guy, to be sure. Part of her wanted to earnestly defend those lands in the southwest, like she said, but she knew what the omens portended and what she must do. Her people followed her, and she hoped the fight was convincing enough for her to keep their loyalty for what must come later. And thus ends Fortuona's only point of view during the last battle. Then, just to give you a very quick rundown of what happens afterwards in their stories, Min learns that it was General Yulan who was the spy under compulsion from Messana. After the last battle is won on the field, while Rand is still doing his thing in Shale Ghul, Matt ends up defeating Fane, Mordeth, Mashadar, Machin Shin, whatever you want to call that mix of things. Tuon tells Matt that she's pregnant, meaning that she can now execute him. And that's the end of both of their stories in A Memory of Light.
And there would be a lot less heartache among men if they were assassinated after they produced an heir. Because
Among women too, right?
because I
uh,
love children, but they can certainly bring you a lot of heartache. Oh no, sorry. I had to throw that in there. My sense of
like taking up hours of your
yes.
time on a holiday to record a hobby podcast that earns no money.
Oh no, this is one of the joys of my life. This is once they're grown and they become cool again. Oh yeah, another awesome chapter here. When we see again more of the changes within Tuon, because she's softened up toward Matrim or Notai even more than she had before. And I thought it was interesting. You said at the end of the last chapter that you covered that she could have just been saying it's time to roll the dice. But this time,
Mm,
after the fight and everything there in the command tent and her pretend fight with Matrim, that she sees behind him there's twin columns of smoke rising behind him in the distance. And the omen of that is that this is a time of great chance, either great victory or great defeat. Nothing in
mm-hmm.
between, but this is the moment. And she rolls the dice on Matt again. So this time she did it
Yeah.
knowingly, though. She looked at the omens. Okay, this is it. We're all in. It's either a great victory or great loss. And so, yeah, I'm going to go with him, and we're going to follow this little plan we cooked up. I know I've remarked on this before. I do love how the two of them they'd kind of discussed the idea in private long before, probably a day or so before. But at this
Mm,
point, they trust one another enough that they don't have to pull each other aside and have a whispered conversation. Okay, this is the time. Let's make this look real.
right.
They can just have a fight that was so real. When Matt walked away, he wasn't sure if it was real or pretend. So
Yeah.
she was
Well, she had that moment of doubt too. She's
yes,
like, I wish I could do what I said. I want to defend my lands,
right,
but gotta do what I gotta do.
right. So it was they were both upset, and you would be after an
Hmm.
attack like that. But they channeled that energy into an Oscar-winning performance in front of the
Yeah.
spy Yulan, who was again an unwitting spy. He was,
Mm,
under
yeah.
compulsion, so it's not something he chose, but he still was the
Right.
spy. So, yeah, in the midst of that, they trust each other that much that they can have this big of a row and go their separate ways. Yet she's tempted to not go back later. We know, but when she does join the last battle again, she's tempted not to, but she trusts Matt. And Matt
Yeah.
wasn't sure if the fight was real or not, but he trusted she was going to come back. He trusted his plans in it so much, even when he wasn't sure. And he was at one point hoping, I hope she does come back when I sent the word. And he sends the message, okay, it's time for you to come back and join the fight. He kept moving forward as if the Sion Chan were coming. And even though he
Yeah.
wasn't sure, he still trusted her. So it's okay to trust somebody when you don't have all of the information. It's okay to trust
In
those.
fact, that's what trust is for.
Right.
I mean, if you
Thank you.
had all the information, you wouldn't need to trust, basically.
Oh, so
Yeah.
well put. Thank you for that. Yeah, without sitting down and clearly defining everything, and I'm one of these people, I like to have things defined. If we're leaving the
Mhm.
house to go on a trip, it doesn't matter if it's a week's vacation or if it's a trip out to get something to eat. Before we leave the driveway, I want to know our destination. I want to have a plan. And I'm just
Mhm.
that type person. I work better under those circumstances.
Oh, yeah.
And some people are that way, but these two, even though they're so different, they trust one another enough. Neither one of them have that plan delineated that way, but they trust one another enough they're gonna keep moving forward anyway, and I like that about it. I like
Yeah.
that even though when Matt didn't know she was coming back, he charged the enemy anyway, hoping she would come back in time, but he charged the enemy, so it's either she's gonna come back and save me or I'm gonna die, but I trust her that much. I'm gonna run at the enemy. That says a lot for these two and for who they are as characters, that they trust one another that much. When she's tempted, when all her generals are saying, "Yeah, we're doing the best thing to back out of this. We're just going to stay here in Ibu Dar," she trusted Matt enough. When she got the message, they open the gateways and come in, and we get to see the Xianchan as good guys for a point in time.
Mm. And she has built up enough trust in her people that they followed her with both of those actions. Like, she was able to really jerk them around like that and still maintain control of such a massive army,
Right.
and maintain their loyalty. And I think that just shows how much credibility she had to build up with them ahead of time. She had to put in that work with them far before this point so that they would be willing to do that, because we know from her thoughts just how shifting and dangerous a place court life actually is. Even though the empress's word is supposed to be supreme, people are constantly trying to execute her and stuff, and constantly trying to assassinate her. And so getting to have that type of loyalty is pretty incredible. And I think Yulin, speaking of that, Yulin was actually a pretty good choice for a spy, because he's not high enough of the blood that anybody would have ever pointed him out as being particularly ambitious. The way she kept noticing Galgan, like, okay, he is the highest ranking
Yes.
person here, until I let Beslin paint one more fingernail and then I raised Matt to being, rod holder or whatever.
Right.
And
Right.
so it made sense that he would be that ambitious and going for the throne, but it wouldn't make sense for somebody like Yulin to do that. There's no way a lieutenant general and somebody of, middle or lower blood or whatever he is could have gained that kind of credibility and clout from other people. Yeah, it just goes to show how much they trust her. And I think it has to depend on their pretty much shared knowledge of the omens, because she could look just absolutely bananas to anybody who doesn't buy this omen stuff. And so
Yeah.
she works within the Shanchan belief system so well. And I think that's part of why she has such solid loyalty, even when she has to jerk them around back and forth with this feint in the last battle.
And don't you know afterwards she was even more trusted by her people because they're like, through all this crazy mess, it worked. And,
Exactly.
in hindsight, they look back and say, wow, that she is a military genius. Look at what
Yeah.
all she did. So she did save the empire and do her part in saving the world by marshaling her troops and bringing them in. And as you said, ensuring they had enough confidence in her that they would follow her through these crazy back and forth orders, that they were okay with that. So,
Mhm.
and you mentioned General Galgan. I thought it was interesting that in your last point of view that you did, chapter 24, I think, where he asked Matt's opinion on something about with the troops, and he did so just kind of feel Matt's knowledge out to see, what would
Mhm.
you do in this situation? Well, Matt just takes it and runs with it. Okay, here, let me show
Yeah.
you. And
He
yeah,
just
you
goes
do
and
this.
does
You, yeah,
it.
yeah, you guys go over there and y'all do that. And you prepare this, and it's gonna sound crazy, but I want y'all to do this. And you could tell he does not like it, even to the point he stepped up to the line of criticizing Tuon to her face, even though he
Without
didn't.
addressing her right, yeah.
Right, yeah, but, it's like he said it, but he said it as if he's talking out loud to himself, not as if he dared to say something back to her.
Mhm.
And, because that's not a society where you just run your mouth and say whatever you think.
Right.
I assume there were people that did that years before, and they're no longer alive, so no one else does that.
Mhm.
But yeah, so he was so offended, really, and affronted by Matt. But by the last battle, when we get to this point, when she has her supposed fight with Matt and they break up, he's like, "I'm not sure which way to go. I'm gonna
Mhm.
keep following Matt."
Yeah.
And she saw this as suspicious, but again, it yeah, it showed really the power and the magnetism of a Taveran and how he
Mm.
works and how
Yeah.
he had garnered the respect of so many of these Seanchan. But as you said, the people respected and trusted her enough. Even General Galgan went along with what she said. He didn't countermand it. He didn't step up to the line of insubordination this time. He had the expression on his face that you could tell he was unhappy, but he went along with what she said. So he had so much respect for Matt, yet at the same time he had so much trust in his empress that he followed her.
Speaking of trust in the Empress, I feel like Matt has had to gain quite a lot of trust in her over time, where when she has joked about executing him or done things in the past, like, leaving him off of her writ of protection for all the people in Lucas' show, and just this history of threatening him, but always having a smile about it.
Yes,
It just
yes.
makes me wonder because I think there was always the threat of her being serious during those times. I think she
Oh,
meant
right.
both meanings every time. But finally, when she announces her pregnancy to him after the last battle, she's like, "Oh, I can have you killed because you've done your job as my consort. We've made an error. You're done." Was that a joke this time? Or was it? Did she mean a double meaning, or did she finally have this trust and rapport in Matt that it was just a joke? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think it was a joke. I really
Yeah.
do.
I think so
And
too. I think they finally were at the level that they could joke around
right,
like that, and she actually trusted him instead of wanting to take
yeah,
him out.
because he just kinda said something like, "Well, we'll see about that," or whatever. I don't remember
Yeah.
exactly, but he was very nonchalant about it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's one of those jokes that are my favorite. It's kind of the Talmanas joke. Not
Yeah.
everybody else gets it. She got it, and Matt got it, but everybody else is like, "Okay, yeah, I understand that," because
Yeah.
that's part of Xianxia society. So, okay, I wonder how she'll do it. Will it be a public execution or will it be by assassination?
Right?
Um, and she and Matt are just enjoying the fact that she doesn't mean it, but everybody thinks
Yeah.
she means it. That's my headcanon on that one anyway.
I think so
Um,
too. I think the last time that she said it was, well, probably back when they made the air around that time.
right.
She's like, "Well, we haven't had an heir yet, so I gotta keep you around. Basically, I can't execute you
Right.
yet." And that at that time, though, that was when Rand showed up for his second meeting with her, and Matt found out by being wrapped up in flows of air that she had taken his medallion. And so normally that would have been the only thing he was wearing at that point, but he wasn't even wearing that. I think she actually still did see him enough as a potential threat. And then when he and Rand was like, "Oh, so you led me to her," then she really thought Matt was a spy or something. And so this just goes to show this joke at the end is a nice little callback to that. I think to show how much she finally trusts him, even though that's not her instinct to do that.
Right. I have one question for you.
Hmm.
You know how Fortuana had raised Min Farshaw to the blood, to be a truth speaker, which I thought it was unfair that, I said truth speaker, doomsayer, rather,
Well,
doomsayer.
she was the truth speaker too, though.
Well, yes,
But
that's right.
yeah,
She's
yeah.
both at that
Hmm.
point, yes. But I thought it was very unfair that the Seanchan know what a doomsayer is, and nobody on this side of the Arid Ocean knows. The Aes Sedai have totally lost that
Yeah.
information. Evidently, it's something that goes back to antiquity, yet, it's very rare, yet the Aes Sedai knew nothing about it. So I thought that was totally unfair, and I
Mm.
pouted a little bit that Jordan included that in the story.
Well, it makes some sense though, because you could see the Aes Sedai sort of eschewing stuff that they can't do and they can't have any power
Ah,
over or understand anything about really. And so they could have legitimately just lost that knowledge like they lost so much else after the breaking. But I think that Shan Chan Society ended up it was just some kind of accident really of luck that they ended up encoding that into their entire society. I think
mm,
this is such a rare talent and maybe like one
Right.
empress had one of these, 1,000 years ago. And ever since then, the idea of reading the omens has now become this entire part of the Shanshan, pseudo religious belief system.
Wow,
And
I threw that out there as just a small comment, and you just totally blew me out of the water with that. Oh, but no, you're right, that makes total sense.
that's why they believe omens, because they had somebody who actually really could read them for real over
Right,
people's heads. And then, they started to learn, okay, what does a couple of towers with a hawk flying through them mean? Because somebody wrote down everything that the first doomsayer said.
right.
And we never really see the omens proven wrong, which I guess the nature of omens, they're unfalsifiable. It's probably not possible to prove them wrong, but I actually think that they do have legitimacy, probably like they really are reading the pattern in the same way that Min does, but I'm not really sure.
That's a very, very real possibility. But my thought on this and my question to you is, even though Fortuana does this as a political move, and it kind of raises her status to have a doomsayer, nobody else has
Mm,
had one in generations and generations. We're given to
yeah.
understand, so it's a political move for the immediate gain. But what about in the future? How do you think that can possibly change the course of future events? That one of the Dragon Reborn's girlfriends or sister wives, or however you define his relationship with Min Farshaw, is now of the blood, of the Xianqian blood.
Mm,
To me, I could see this possibly even strengthening the ties between the other nations of Randland and the Xianqian who are here, who
mhm.
have these lands that they've taken back. Just one more factor that could possibly kind of reintegrate them into this civilization and this society, but maybe not. I don't know how much effect she can really have on them. So, what are your thoughts on that for as far as where it could take us in the future?
Well, it's interesting. I had a hard time thinking of actual events this would change in terms of the way these nations relate to each other, but it did immediately make me think of how the stories are going to be told, how the history is going to be written by the Shanchan of this part of their history. I think it's going to be a way for them to write about completely write over the fact that there was ever any antagonism with the dragon.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and
Oh, and
so they could
well,
it gives them legitimacy. Look, here's one of the dragon's harem basically that's a part of our empire, and it was always that way. They could make it to where,
yeah,
and maybe not even on purpose, just the way stories get retold because nobody knew who Min was before that, right? She wasn't like
right,
really
right.
famous or anything. So I think it would just go down in history as the dragon, ended up having a lover who was in the Shan court, and that's how they saved the last battle, how they won the last battle
Right,
together, or
right.
something like that.
But it would keep them from going too far with it, from completely revising history and making the dragon seem unimportant, because this woman is
Mm,
truth speaker, and no matter what's
yeah.
said or recorded, she can stand up and say, "No, that's not right. Here's." Yeah, she's the one person who has the power to stand up and publicly talk back to the empress and tell
Mm.
her that's a stupid thing to do or to say. So yeah, she could keep them from revising that history too far, at least during her lifetime or her tenure at court.
Mm. Yeah, I didn't even really think about it like that. I was thinking so far in the future how the
Right.
stories would be distorted after all of their
Yes.
lifetimes. But
Me
yeah, I like that
me
thought.
too, and I was thinking of the whole doomsayer aspect of it, not the truth speaker aspect
Right,
till you
right.
said that, and it kinda came to me, wow, she can get it at least the immediate history is recorded a little more
That's
correctly.
true. I mean, if there's any court stenographer that just writes, "Hey, this came out of the truth speaker's mouth," like that's going to be history forever. Like, no,
Yes,
you can't gainsay that.
right, right. Oh, and they need that. All societies with a very strong, powerful government that tends to just change the truth on a whim. Yeah, they need somebody who can record things faithfully because
Mm.
if we don't need people going back and rewriting history. That never works good. Never works good. Oh me. Well, we've explored a lot of things in this
We really
episode.
have. There's going to be so much after show. I'm excited for this one.
Oh, well, I hope all of our listeners have enjoyed it, and I hope you'll all join us next time for interlude episode 11, where we'll begin covering Oliver's point of view. In fact, we'll begin and finish it in the same episode. We'll begin in Towers of Midnight in the epilogue, and in Memory of Light, chapters 37 and 39.
There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajaradane. That's LajaradaYne. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so please leave us some feedback by rating and reviewing on whichever platform you use to listen to us. You can also contact us by emailing at lajaradane@gmail.com or reaching out to the show account on Twitter at mind_wheel. To support the show and get access to some perks, subscribe to us on Patreon for just $3 a month by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind.
I need to get situated.
Okay, so I've got my Audacity going too, and I will be ready
Okay.
whenever you are.
All righty. Test 1, 2, test 1, 2. Okay, yeah, I think I got the audio level a little better this time.
Okay.
So,
Oh, you know what? Let me get my books within reach. Give me just a second. I may not need them, but you never know.
yes, ma'am. Hmm.
Okay, any flipping that needs to be done can now be done. Hi,
All
everyone.
right.
Oh, sorry.
And, oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't quite
Whoops.
ready. I'm trying to pull some of this together. So, my apologies. All right. Now I'm ready.